Once upon a time there lived a rich merchant whose wife had died, leaving him all alone with his pretty daughter. So he married a widow with 2 daughters of her own, hoping that they would be friends with his own child. But he was mistaken. His new wife was the most snobbish and bad-tempered woman in the land, who cared for no one but her own 2 daughters, who were plain and spiteful. She was soon jealous of the merchant's daughter, who was sweet and kind, and made her do all the housework. From morn till night, the girl toiled in the great house, sweeping and dusting, polishing and cleaning, till the place sparkled. Her stepsisters lay in bed, while she waited on them, or else they preened themselves in front of the mirrors that shone with polishing. It was fetch this or bring that all day long, until, when the evening came, she was glad to curl up in the embers of the fire to keep warm. The poor girl bore it all with patience. Soon her clothes turned into rags, but even with her cheeks stained with tears and soot from the fire, she was 10 times prettier than her 2 ugly stepsisters. From her habit of sitting in the fireplace, her stepsisters called her Clinker Lump, but the younger sister, who wasn't quite so unkind, sometimes called her Cinderella. So the days passed, and while the stepsisters grumbled and groused, for nothing was ever right for them, Cinderella still smiled as she worked. One day there was great excitement in the merchant's house. A herald from the castle brought them an invitation to a grand ball which the king was giving in honor of his son's birthday. All the nobility and people of importance from round and about were to be invited, including the stepsisters, because they were rich and well known. They were very happy and excited at the thought of going to the castle and meeting the prince, who was known to be very handsome. All day long they looked at fine materials, and the bundles of silks, satins and rich velvets lay all round the house until the merchant began to grumble at the sight of them. But still the stepsisters could not make up their minds. Everything had to be right for this special occasion. Cinderella had excellent taste, so her sisters asked her advice, which she gave freely. At last the elder sister made up her mind. "I shall wear red velvet with a lace trimming," she announced, "and I must have new red shoes to match." "Well, I shall wear a silk skirt with a gold-flowered cloak," said her sister, "and my diamond necklace will be just right." So the dressmakers and shoemakers were called in and the needles flew. At last the dresses were ready and Cinderella thought they were beautiful. But they did not please the sisters, who found fault with them, and she had to alter this, and so that until they were satisfied. On the day of the ball, Cinderella ran from one to the other helping them into their finery. The hairdressers came and piled their hair on top of their heads in the fashion of the day, while the sisters complained that this curl was too long, or this one too short. In the end, it was Cinderella who brushed and smoothed their hair to their satisfaction, and at last they were ready. They looked magnificent. The younger sister, taking a last look in the mirror, said, "Wouldn't you like to go to the ball, Cinderella?" "Don't laugh at me," begged Cinderella, "I have no place there." "Yes, that's true," said her cruel sister, "everyone would laugh to see a clinker lump at the ball." Cinderella hung her head and said nothing. She helped them into their carriage, laughing and excited, and watched them out of sight down the road to the castle. Then she returned to the kitchen, and, sitting among the embers of the fire, she began to cry. All at once there was a sudden light in the room. Startled, Cinderella looked up. Then she saw a shining figure standing beside her, glowing and beautiful. "Don't be afraid, child," the lady said gently. "I am your fairy godmother. Why are you crying?" "I should like—" "Oh, what's the use?" said Cinderella and could not stop her tears. "You want to go to the ball, don't you?" asked her fairy godmother. "Yes, yes," sobbed Cinderella. "Very well, so you shall," said her fairy godmother. "Do just as I tell you. Go into the garden and bring me the biggest pumpkin you can find." Drying her eyes, Cinderella went out and cut the largest pumpkin in the patch and brought it to her godmother. She could not see how a pumpkin would get her to the ball, but she watched as her godmother scraped all the seeds out, then touched it with her magic wand. It turned into a golden coach. "Good, now for the horses to pull it," said her godmother. If you look in the mouse traps, you will find 6 white mice. Bring them to me." As she was bid, Cinderella found the mouse traps. There were 6 white mice which she gave to her godmother. As the trap was gently lifted and each mouse ran out, she touched it with her magic wand and it turned into a prancing horse. Soon, there was a team of 6 white horses in front of the coach. "Now for the coachman," ordered her godmother. "Go and look in the rat trap." The rat trap held a large, fat rat with fine whiskers. With a tap of the wand, it was transformed into a splendid coachman with twinkling eyes and the best whiskers you have ever seen. "All we need now are the footmen," said godmother. "In the garden shed, hiding by the watering can, you will see 6 lizards. Bring them to me." Cinderella was too happy to argue and soon the lizards turned into 6 footmen with snow-white breeches and blue velvet coats. They looked magnificent, just as if they had been born footmen. "Well, there you are," said the fairy godmother, "you can go to the ball. Hurry up and get ready." "But how can I go in these rags?" asked Cinderella, holding out her tattered skirt. Laughing, the fairy godmother touched Cinderella gently with her wand. At once the rags fell away and Cinderella was wearing a beautiful dress of gold and silver that sparkled as she moved. There was a necklace of diamonds in her hair to catch the light. Cinderella could not believe her eyes. This was truly a magic dress. "Here are the slippers," said her godmother, holding out the daintiest, prettiest pair of glass slippers in the world. Cinderella gasped. "Is this really happening?" she asked. "Of course, now hurry along and enjoy yourself," said her godmother, kissing her, "but whatever you do, do not stay after midnight. My magic will not last after then and everything will be as before. As soon as the clock strikes, you will be in rags." "I'll remember," promised Cinderella and climbed into her coach. The night was alive with stars which twinkled like tiny lights, and as the coach approached the castle on the hilltop, Cinderella could hear the faint echo of music and see the flickering shadows cast by the lanterns that swung from the walls. When the prince heard that a great and beautiful princess had arrived in a magnificent coach, he came to greet her and led her to the ballroom. The music stopped and everyone stared at Cinderella. No one had ever seen anyone so beautiful. "Who is she?" they whispered among themselves, but no one knew the answer. Cinderella danced with the prince, who could not take his eyes off her and would dance with no one else. A magnificent supper was served, but the prince ate nothing, he just wanted to gaze at his princess. Cinderella sat near her sisters and even offered them a dish of tiny, sugared fruit, but they did not recognize her. So the evening wore on and the prince and Cinderella danced and danced to the music, forgetting the time. Then she heard the first stroke of midnight. She made a deep curtsy to the king and queen, and ran down the steps and out of the castle, heedless of the prince's shouts for her to come back. As she reached the last few steps she could hear the clock striking. Boom, boom, boom. In her haste, she dropped one of her slippers, but dared not stop to pick it up. The clock stopped and Cinderella was once more in rags, the coach and horses gone, though she did see a large rat slinking away into the darkness. Swiftly, she ran home to await her sister's return. They could talk of nothing but the ball and the beautiful princess who had danced with the prince all evening. At the castle, the prince was desolate. No one had seen his princess leave and the servants said they had seen only a kitchen maid in rags by the gates. He held the slipper in his hands. Somehow he must find his princess. The king had an idea. Why not send the heralds out to seek the owner of the slipper? He suggested, and then you will find the princess. So the heralds went out into the land carrying the glass slipper. Every girl must try it on, and the prince would marry the one who could wear it. Every house in the kingdom was visited and every woman tried on the slipper, but to no avail. On the third day, the prince himself accompanied the heralds and they came at last to the merchant's house. The stepsisters tried to squeeze their feet into the tiny slipper. The elder, seeing her toe was too large, thought of cutting it off, but her sister, impatient for her try, snatched it just in time. The younger sister had no luck either, her heel stuck out by several inches. "Is there anyone else in the house?" asked the heralds. "Let me try," said Cinderella, who had been watching in the background. Her sisters laughed and mocked her, but the prince was insistent. Even in her rags, he could see she was beautiful. Cinderella sat down and slipped her foot into the tiny slipper. It fitted her beautifully. The two sisters were astonished and could not believe their eyes, but Cinderella put her hand in her pocket and brought out the second slipper. At that very moment, her fairy godmother arrived and, touching Cinderella with her wand, changed her rags once more into the magnificent ball dress she had worn at the castle. The two sisters recognized the princess and begged her forgiveness, and Cinderella kissed them and took them to the castle with her. The prince was overjoyed. He had found his princess. In a few days they were married and lived happily ever after. The end.